This is Funny Markiplier E. Funny Markiplier E shows off something very important, the most used character in the English language, which is, E. However, in Chinese, the most used character is this. Compared to Funny Markiplier E, it's absolutely f***ing horrifying. What the hell's going on over there? Have they just been eating too much bingchi? Did somebody put something in the tofu? Because this is just not natural! Well, actually, the truth is that these characters have been around for longer than the Roman alphabet. These guys have been in use since the 12th century BCE. So, that has to mean something, right? If these characters can be around for longer than the Roman alphabet and be surprisingly confusing, then there must be a reason that they're used. So that begs the titular question, how do kanji work? The history of kanji begins in Japan, when the emperor said, hey guys, let's make cool characters that mean cool things like the sound of an arrow shot from a bow, or a man who is devoured by a tiger who then decides to help that tiger devour other people. And then let's make cool anime. They also just made them mean things off of nothing, and that's where our story ends. Okay, well, they were actually made in China. Okay, there goes my viewership. But wait, I hear you say, through your monitor, in your house, I am in your walls. I've seen these funny characters in the animes, and in the mangas, so why are these Chinese characters? Well, that takes a bit more explanation, so I will be giving a small little history lesson in this video. Our story begins in China in the 12th century BCE. This is, as a matter of fact, where the first Chinese characters were made. One of the earliest versions of this writing system was the Oracle Bone script. About 25% of the characters were pictographs. And roughly another 32% were associative compounds, which essentially used those pictographs in order to make a different meaning. So, in a sense, about 50% of the writing in this script was pictographs. This holds true today, but to a very small extent, and we will get to that later. Over time, these characters evolved to be more sharp and similar to what we have today. In the 5th century, Japan adopted these characters as they had no writing system, and even made 2 separate writing systems out of the characters. Essentially, the scripts have stayed the same between the nations for the last 1600 years. There are a fair share of exceptions, and the differences between the scripts that each nation uses merits its own video, but that's the basic history of why these characters are in both languages. This little history lesson is important for understanding that kanji are a group of slightly different characters that are related across nations. In English, we used to have this character called Thorn, but now we don't. Icelandic still has it though, so while we share this alphabet with Iceland, there are some characters that we don't use at all. This is the same for both Japanese and Chinese. With that in mind, and considering that the title of this video is somewhat ambiguous, I will be talking about how these characters are read, how these characters hold meaning, and how they are actually used in the languages they can be seen in. So, how do you read these things? The simple answer is the more complex answer is that it's complex. In Chinese, a character basically has a single syllable sound associated with it. And the way this would be read is usually just known from exposure. Kind of like seeing the number 4 and knowing that it's just, read like 4. There are also different tones, 4 to be exact. 4 seems to be a running theme.
Welcome to Five Nights at Freddy's 4.
A high flat tone, a rising tone, a low flat tone, and a falling tone. These tones help distinguish characters in speech. While you may use shi with its 4th tone to say to be, you can say shi with the 2nd tone to mean food or to eat. So for Chinese, it's all about knowing one sound with a specific tone for each character. However, some characters have multiple readings, like the character Xing, which can also be pronounced as Hong. And in Japanese, this is actually the norm. When Japan adopted these characters, they decided to keep both the Chinese readings and their Japanese readings. So they just applied them to the characters, and now we have both. This means that the character kuruma, which means car, is pronounced as sha in compound words. A compound word is essentially a combination of 2 or more kanji. And while that seems simple on its own, it doesn't always work like that. And trust me, I already have a video talking about how crazy that is in the works. So for Japanese, reading is based on whether or not a character is seen in a compound. Well, usually at least. Do not get me started on this. But with the reading stuff out of the way, we have to discuss how characters are formed. So let's start with the simple ones that have already been partially discussed. A pictograph has a somewhat self-explanatory name. It is a picture of the thing it is trying to represent. Take a look at these pictographs. The character that looks like an eye is an eye.
Aye.
The character that looks like a tree is a tree.
Aye.
The character that looks like a mountain, I'll let you guess. Yep, exactly. It's Bore Vessel Etruscan Ceramic. Mountain. What's to note here, however, is that only 5% of the characters in modern Chinese are proper pictographs.
Yikes.
It used to be
That's
about
quite
55%
big.
of the language, as I showed before, but it isn't that
Impressive.
nowadays. What's interesting to note about these characters is that a character like Horse once actually looked a lot more like a horse rather than, whatever the hell this is. But corruption of characters for the sake of making things simple is a very common thing seen in the writing of these characters, and it even created two of Japan's writing systems. Ideograms are like these, but are used to represent ideas rather than physical things. Numbers, for example, are ideas rather than physical things. We can see two cows, but we can also see two mirrors. Ideograms, like pictographs, are self-explanatory. The characters 1, 2, and 3 are, self-explanatory. The character for middle is, you guessed it, self-explanatory. The characters for above and below are holy fuck, I fucking go. Now, if kanji were this simple, I wouldn't be making this video, but don't worry, they definitely aren't. We can actually also see compound ideographs. These usually use two pictograms and occasionally an ideograph to create a new character. As shown off earlier, the character Xiu shows a man on the left leaning against a tree on the right. Compound ideographs aren't always pictographs, however, as they may combine ideographs with pictographs. This is why they are compound ideographs rather than compound pictographs. The word for the point of a sharp object is composed of two ideographs, big and small, as it represents a point, which is something that goes from big to small. Even with this in mind, many of these characters can be pictographic in nature, but can also be a little more harder to grasp than others. Take a look at the character for military. It uses the character for spear and foot. Not incredibly intuitive. So with that in mind, these are the first three basic forms of Chinese characters. But the next one I will discuss actually dominates the spectrum of characters and takes up about 80% of all character space. These characters are none other than the phonosemantic characters. These characters have something in common across the board. They're mainly two radicals slapped together, with one portraying the basic meaning and the other being the sound, which also gives some meaning to the character. The character dung, for example, means to mount or to climb. So this character here, with that character in it, has the character for foot. So if a foot mounts something, it's probably stepping on it, and that's exactly what it means. The character dung uses the eye radical. So if an eye mounts something, it's staring at it.
What are you doing? What are you doing? You staring at them?
And if fire is mounted, it's probably a lamp, and it is. The interesting part is that all these characters are pronounced the exact same way. Dung. This even works cross-linguistically. The characters here all have the same reading of to, from Chinese. And yes, they all relate to the original characters in some way. If you wanted the big answer to the question I posed at the start of this video, that's how most Chinese characters work. They take one character for a sound, and then another for more meaning. However, the truth is that this isn't a perfect representation. You can choose the blue pill and just believe that all these characters are just that simple and be also cringe, or you can take the red pill and realize that that's all stupid! These characters can make sense like that so easily, and a lot of the times they do. At least, kind of. Another character with dung is very foreign to that original meaning of mount. This character means clear, like water. And even though it uses that mount character, the meaning isn't so clear. Of course you can think about it that way, but it isn't perfect. And sometimes the characters don't exactly work, at all. The much more common character for silent, using the character qing, which is the color of growing plants, and also zheng, the word for dispute, makes up the character. So that means silence is a dark-colored dispute? Maybe if it were darkness that could work, and even then, this gets weirder with the transfer and lone characters. Essentially, speech is more important in writing than language. So with that in mind, some words sounded the same, and new characters had to be invented to clarify the meanings of the words. The character for to come hadn't yet been invented, so they did the only logical thing and used the character for a type of weed before they ripped the top off, and that's what we have today. The character for old and examine used to be the same as well, until they split into two similar looking characters. Essentially speaking, you can think of Chinese writing as a beautiful mess of ideas rolled into strokes. Through different changes and evolutions and corruptions, we now have this beautiful marvel of a writing script. So, considering that I've showed you how they work in terms of writing, I have to show you how they work in terms of speech, but that's a little harder to talk about. A question you might have had is, are these characters letters, or are these characters just words? And the truth is, even though I gave you meanings, in a way, a ton of the characters are meaningless without a second character. Most words in Chinese are formed with two characters. From bread to chemotherapy, you need two characters for over 80% of the words. This is because just using one character can make some phrases easy to confuse. The sound shi is used so much in the Chinese language that there is a poem written in characters using only that sound. It's a play on how often the sound is used and just goes to show that if you were to only use a single character for each word, it would be easy to screw them up. Even then, while this seems simple, there are also complexities. While Chinese does in fact do this quite often, the way it is done varies. Some words are formulaic in a weird way. They may use the characters to or z. These characters mean head and child respectively. However, if I want to put both the character for box and the character for child together, I will not get box child, whatever the hell that is. I will just get a box. Instead of box needing two characters to make a word, it already has a character, so the z is slapped on there to distinguish it from other words. Even then, some words have characters that are completely meaningless. Yes, meaningless. They combine to make a single word and aren't used for much else. The word for rose and trash fit into this category, so Chinese words usually use two or more characters as to clarify the meaning. But this isn't the video on how Chinese grammar works, so let's just also note that the verbs will use two characters, the actual verb and an object that shows what the verb is doing, even if the term running steps is redundant. And it can also have a character slapped onto the end to express the result of a verb. You can write something correctly or write something incorrectly. In English, we do this too. We can pick something or pick up something. Chinese characters are used to cover a lot of meaning with just a bit of writing, and in Japanese that is also very true. Japanese is interesting in the fact that Chinese characters were their sole system of writing for one time, until they decided to adopt those separate writing systems I mentioned earlier. They were born out of the Chinese characters and were actually invented by women due to the fact that they got less education and therefore knew fewer Chinese characters. Nowadays, these systems live in harmony and are all vital to understanding written Japanese. Katakana is used for foreign terms and foreign names, while hiragana is used for native Japanese terms and things in grammar. The way the Chinese characters are used in Japanese is a little bit different, however. The characters in Japanese are read, usually, one of two ways, with either the Chinese sound or the Japanese sound. Generally speaking, the Chinese sound will appear in compound words as mentioned before, and the Japanese sound will appear outside of those compound words. When the characters seen here are touching, they make the sound shokumotsu. However, when they are separated with this character from the hiragana script, be, it is now tabemono. While this is insanely insane, this is how it works. But this weirdness allows for these other two scripts to show their power. Instead of being used as a word with one reading in text, it can be seen as a way to convey meaning while using other, easier to read scripts. The verb taberu shows this off perfectly. This form of the verb is a non-past tense of to eat. The character for to eat is seen right here, as shown before. Unlike in Chinese, where another character would need to be known beforehand to show off information about tenses, Japanese can afford to just use hiragana. You can make this form more polite by turning the ru into masu, and you can display a want to eat with tabetai. So the basic information to eat can be conveyed with the Chinese character, while the hiragana can do the rest. So, this is really the conclusion to the video. Chinese characters can be explained quite simply as bundles of information. In Chinese, they are used to make writing very quick and precise, while in Japanese, they are used to show off a lot of information in one spot. The Chinese script was never made to be complex, or weird, or really aesthetic. It was made to get information across quickly and cleanly, and I think it does that pretty well. Even if it's, well, pretty stupid at times. I hope y'all enjoyed this video. I had a lot of fun making it. I edited this over a few months, but I edited the last half in a few days. So yeah, that was nice. If you like this video, give it a like. If you dislike it, give it a dislike. And if you have any recommendations, please tell me. I want to know because I like making videos in different languages and stuff.